From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to make plans for the next rainy day dinner while you're riding out that mudslide. And now, the podcast host who always avoids mudslides because he is a really fast runner, Pete Dominic!
Oh my gosh, thank you very much, Pico. And yeah, that's absolutely true. I'll never forget that time. I was almost killed in a mudslide, but I actually outran it. It's crazy. A lot of people saw it. They're like, wow, lucky you're so fast, Pete, because you actually outran that thing. That mudslide that covered the whole town, but you are quite the sprinter. Pete Coe, thank you very much, as always, for another irreverent introduction that I have to improvise with. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, here for you each weekday, talking about all of the most important issues that affect you, your family, your community, your planet, your soul. That's right, from cures to anxiety and depression, and even on today's show, recession, because I'm talking to award-winning economist Dean Baker. We're going to continue to cover it all right here on Stand Up each day. So let me know who you'd like to hear me talking to on the show, and I will reach out to those folks. One of your all-time favorites, longtime listener, Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C., joins me today. Another amazing conversation with him, and as I just mentioned, economist Dean Baker is on the show. Who was it that suggested I get Dean back on? It's been way too long. He used to join me regularly on the old Sirius XM show. We had a great conversation. We covered a lot, and that is the second of my two guests. My conversation with Dean Baker starts in the 48th minute, in case you want to skip to it. I think you're going to love both of my guests, both conversations with both Bill B in D.C., Bill Boyle, and economist Dean Baker on today's episode of Stand Up. I hope you had a great weekend. I sure did. Friday night, I performed at Soul Joel's Comedy Club in Pennsylvania. Great to have listeners there. Always great to see you. I did over an hour-long set. It went really good. It was great to be back on stage, and maybe want to book some more shows soon. So hopefully I can come to your neck of the woods and we can all hang out and have a party. At least that's the plan. That's the fantasy for 2023. And what did you do for Martin Luther King Day? Did you volunteer? Did you do a service project with your family? My family and I were doing service projects all day long. Either that or we didn't. It's one of the two, and we just took advantage of the day off. I certainly did. I took advantage of the day off to catch up. So much work to do when you're hosting a daily podcast, so many other things that get left undone. Very excited to have my new intern, Odessa Sun, joining me. Super helpful, working her into the mix, and lots of you met her on Thursday night at the Hangout, and she seems to really enjoy those, so maybe she'll be there again this week. I hope you will be. If you're not a paid subscriber, you are missing out. StandUpWithPete.com right now. Let's get after it and join us on Thursday nights and anytime in the Discord platform. Just a couple of news stories I wanted to mention, bring you up to speed if you're not up to speed yet. Of course, President Biden yesterday commemorated Dr. Martin Luther King. He took the all Air Force One down to Atlanta, where he delivered a sermon, actually on Sunday at Ebenezer Baptist Church, becoming the first sitting president to do so at the church where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor. During his speech, it was about 25 minutes, President Biden touched on both Dr. King's faith and his commitment to equality. The president said he felt, quote, humbled to achieve the historic milestone of speaking there. He spoke about King's legacy, and he called the Reverend one of his heroes, but NPR reports the sermon quickly turned political as Biden discussed economic issues and voting rights. Here's a little sample highlight from President Biden on Sunday.
The idea, if I can hold a second here, the idea that we're supposed to remain silent on the abuses of the past, as if they didn't occur, that's not being woke. That's being honest. That's talking about history.
All right, I like it. Well done, President Biden. He is having a rough few days, though, in the news, what with these classified documents being found at his home and his office and different places and spaces. Just an unbelievable shot to the foot, an unforced error, or a forced error, really. Of course, you've heard all about this story, and it is not going anywhere anytime soon. I spoke with Bill Boyle about that. Also, the George Santos story is not going anywhere. Yesterday, empty barrel and Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy insisted he's always had some questions related to how George Santos's resume amid ongoing revelations with the laws and embellishments by the freshman lawmaker from New York. Among the claims, folks, related to George Santos, that in 2021, a campaign staffer of his had masqueraded as Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff in a bid to gin up support for George Santos, according to the New York Times. Well, reporters caught up with Kevin McCarthy and asked him about that specific allegation, and here's what he had to say.
I never know all about his resume or not, but I always had a few questions about it.
What about him using the campaign pretending to be your chief of staff in his solicitation?
I didn't know about that. It happened, and I know they corrected, but I was not notified about that till a later date.
Did you speak to him about it at all?
Yeah, I didn't know about it till a later date, though, unfortunately.
Oh, he didn't know about it till a later date. I wonder when he found out that one of George Santos' people was impersonating his chief of staff. And then had it corrected, he said. He said he had it corrected. He didn't say, I told him to knock that off. I had a little talk with him and said, hey, what's going on here? What the hell are you doing? You're impersonating my chief of staff? You're no longer allowed to be in any way involved with us. Goodbye. No, he just corrected it. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to my guest interviews, shall we? Two great guests joining me today. Coming up, award-winning economist Dean Baker joins me to talk about the current state of the economy, the threat that the debt ceiling hostage-taking poses our economy and the global economy, really, and so much more. I think you're going to love my conversation with Dean Baker, and I know you'll love my conversation with William Boyle, Bill B. in D.C., who I caught up with late last night. Got the latest analysis from Bill on information regarding almost a year since Russia invaded Ukraine. Also talked about some domestic policy issues. Always great to catch up with Bill. Oh, but real quick, let's check in with Odessa the intern. We've started off this week 2, and you're doing great. Yeah. You've been to 2 hangouts. Listeners love you. They say you fit right in. You've done really, really a great job at those. But today I gave you control of all of my social media accounts. That was hard for me to give those passwords to you. What do you think of my social media accounts? I have a lot of accounts, and I don't like it. You're managing it now. What are your thoughts? You have a great following of people. My favorite pictures are your profile. I love looking at your shiny bald head. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that you couldn't be working for someone who had a face or a head that was a little bit easier on the eyes, at least hair. Maybe I should have more hats. Go ahead. Yes, other than my shiny bald head. I would say your social media presence, you have an amazing following and nothing to complain about in my end. I'm really excited to get started starting this week. Do you know about Facebook? Your people, your age, you don't use Facebook. Well, I was offended last week when you said LinkedIn was for old people. And I was going to tell you, I think it's Facebook now. Oh, no, I agree with you. I think Facebook has always been for old people, which includes me and my mom. But I thought LinkedIn was for executives. I just thought it was a place where you look for a job or something. I really didn't understand it. But you're telling me I should be on there. And I just posted a video that you edited on LinkedIn. So good job. Definitely. Go subscribe to Pete's LinkedIn. Go connect with them. Thank you. And subscribe to Odessa's LinkedIn, where apparently she's huge on LinkedIn. I wouldn't say huge, but someday I will be. All right, someday. So subscribe or connect with. I don't know what you say about LinkedIn. Okay, and anyway, what do you think of my social media strategy so far? What social media strategy? Right. Good answer. Yeah, there's one. That's going to be. We need to come up with a social media strategy, how to use it all, and that's going to be. I want you to do a lot of that because I don't love that stuff. And you're a young person and you get it. You're already doing it. Are you managing, can we say this on the record, that you do a social media for a bar out there in Wisconsin? I was actually just creating a few posts for the week. So I've gotten a little practice at scheduling posts, planning out when it is that I want to get content out there. But I run a social media page for a college bar at Whitewater, Wisconsin called Cheap Shots. That's the name of the bar, is called Cheap Shots?
It is called Cheap Shots, yes. I'm a bartender there, and I started managing their account at the end of August.
Can we do your own podcast where after your bartending shift, you just talk about what happened that night?
That would require you to get on around 5 a.m. your time.
No, we don't know. I'm not going to do it then. We just you just have notes. And then the next day we check in when it's all over. And you just tell us the bartending chronicles. That's for another day. Okay, finally, I wanted to ask you, I need to know, I haven't talked to you about this. I told you I was going to ask you this on the record. I need to know kind of your relationship with news. Like, do you pay attention to the news? It's kind of an important part of the show.
It is important.
But you don't seem to care about the news, what's going on in the world or politics or...
I don't think it's fair to say that I don't care about it.
Okay, go ahead. Defend yourself.
And something that I personally try to keep up with, it's called Morning Brew. It's this email newsletter that sends out like a 5-minute read of what's happening. Mm-hmm. It goes from the stock market to what's happening politically in our world. So, I mean, I try to, but I don't try to consume my day with it. I hate to say this to you, but I feel like it's very much shoved in our throats all the time. So I like to stay up to date. And if I'm going to vote, I want to know who I'm voting for.
If I'm going to vote, I mean, you're definitely going to vote. You mean voting?
I've been voting, yes, since I was 18.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. That's fine. You're in school. You're working. You're trying to figure out, I get it. I didn't pay any attention, by the way, hardly any attention to the news when I was your age. So far be it for me to say, but you get a morning email or something like that, and then it's easy. And you're catching up. You said you're catching up with the markets. You do a lot of market watching, Odessa. Are you investing?
I'm still figuring it out. My parents tell me I have to understand how to manage my money, and so
all right,
it's my attempt.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be able to help you with that. All right, and that's it, I guess. All right, that's all I wanted to ask you. We're getting to know Odessa. She's the intern. She's doing a lot of good stuff. And so now your job is to basically plug the social media that you want everybody to subscribe to. So we've got 2 Twitter accounts. I'll do it tonight, and then you can just punch it up, right? At Pete Dominic and Stand Up with Pete, which we've got to figure out what to do with that one because it's kind of dormant. But there's 8,000 followers on it. It's pretty good. And I don't know how we utilize it. We got 2 Facebook accounts, but we really got to be pushing the public one, Stand Up with Pete Dominic, right?
Yes. Go follow, go subscribe, go connect, all with Stand Up with Pete Dominic. And I'll be the one managing, so I'll know whether or not you guys are doing it, and I can mention it in Thursday night's hangout.
Yeah, you don't want to have to answer to Odessa.
Really intimidating if you can't tell.
What is that name, by the way? You told us at the hangout. Where did your name come from? Odessa is a weird... Were there any other Odessas in your first and second grade?
No, not at all. And Odessa, it came from the city in Ukraine.
Right.
So that's where I was named after.
You have some roots there.
I do.
Are you paying attention to what's happening there?
I am, through my parents.
Good. Well, you're going to love, and everybody else is going to love, my conversation with Bill Boyle, who you've met. That's who's coming up. So why don't you just, before I throw to him, why don't you just say what you thought about him when you first met him? You were at the hangout, and this guy was talking, and you texted me. You said, is this guy a spy, I think?
I did. You and we were texting back and forth, and I thought it was quite clever. I kept on watching you check the message under your table, be all sneaky, and wanted to say something to you that I would get a reaction out of and know when you read it. And so it was partially supposed to be funny, but also the way he was speaking, what he was saying. And then you messaged me, oh yeah, he's just a guy who owns parking garages.
That's right.
It just didn't sound fitting at all. So I thought, if this guy was a spy, if he worked for the CIA, I wouldn't be all that surprised.
Well, people have said that. A lot of people have said it's just not the case. He's just a DC business owner who reads a lot and has had a life. So, Odessa, thank you very much. Great job talking here on the pod. This is fun. And let's get to my conversation with Bill B. Follow him on Twitter at Bill B in DC. Ladies and gentlemen, as far as we know, he's just a parking garage owner, but he's the smartest guy in a lot of rooms. I'll tell you that. So let's do it right now.
How are you, Bill Boyle?
I'm doing well. My Giants won last night, shockingly.
Yeah.
And hung out in a really amazing dive bar in D.C. to watch the game with friends and had an amazing weekend. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. That sounds like a fun time. You know, when you're in a bar like that, does COVID cross your mind? You've just gotten ill not too long ago. You're over it, I think, I hope.
Yeah, I've got the latest thing, the latest shot. I've had it twice. I'm not getting my shorts in a bunch over it anymore. I just figure we're going to keep getting sick until we die, and there's not a lot you could do. Especially this latest version is really contagious.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty chill about it at this point.
You go to a Giants bar in DC with all Giants fans to watch the game with your family.
I was in a place called Ivy and Coney, which remember when I got you that hot dog when you desperately needed it?
Do I remember it?
Right. That was quite a moment we had there.
What I strangely remember is how much I was eyeing yours while I was eating mine. I was like, I'm going to need another one. Maybe Boyle won't want his, but then you did eat it. In fact,
I think it's big that you can admit to yourself that you were eyeing my hot dog. I mean, that's I
absolutely was.
That's good. That's
I
good.
wanted to eat it
coming
all
to terms
up
with yourself
and put it inside of me.
With celery salt and
so good. Anyway,
poppers,
that's where you watched.
So that's where I was last night. You know that you've been there. I think you briefly walked in there.
Your friend runs the place or something.
That
right?
is. It's called Ivy and Coney, and it's the best dive bar in Washington.
So what is Washington saying about the Biden classified documents that have been found anywhere that Joe Biden has lived or worked?
Right, exactly.
He sprinkled some classified documents around himself. This is a real momentum changer. The nuance of the differences don't matter. It just doesn't now. No?
Well, they are scattered around like top secret pixie dust, basically, in Joe Biden's life. And I'll tell you, I'm sure that the Obama lawyers and the Bush lawyers and probably the fucking Carter lawyers are going through every box.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said yesterday. I said, I bet you all these living former presidents are trying to make sure, but everybody that handles classified documents at all once acts like you would know where you there's such a very careful chain of custody for these documents, and the rest of us are like, we don't know what to believe. So, I mean, I can tell you the deal with this, right? Everything gets classified. I think you and I talked about this recently, where the schedule for a meeting, even if it doesn't say what's happened in the meeting, gets classified. If the meeting was top secret, just the announcement of the meeting is also top secret. So the DC gets insane amounts of overclassification, right? It's still not good that Biden missed this, particularly that his lawyers missed it 6 months ago. They should have been all over this a long time ago. Until we know what is in those documents, if we will ever find out what is in those documents, people can just fill in the blanks, and they could be, and that's not too hard to believe that the former president would have some kind of classified documents that meant something to him somehow. I don't know that he wanted to keep a record of it, because it's not like there's ever only one record. But
if it meant, so here's the thing, right? It's not a crime to mistakenly have a top secret document. It's a crime to try to avoid giving it back and to be showing it intentionally to people to impress them,
right?
And maybe to be potentially monetizing them. And it's especially a crime when, for instance, in Trump's case, he had the information about another country's nuclear weapons program. Like, these are incredibly valuable, crazy things. Now, in Biden's garage, right, we're never going to totally know, but we're going to find out what the classification was. Everything I'm hearing is that all we're seeing right now is just top secret. I think the classification started at classified, top secret, and then there's 50 other layers above that. This is not super serious stuff as far as we know. And, to be honest with you, it's the question of trying to hold it, to refuse to give it back, to hide it, to maybe use it. That's where the illegality is. And so, yes, politically it looks dumb. People aren't going to spend as much time as you and I are on parsing this stuff. But it's really apples and oranges. It's just politically stupid, and it complicates things for Merrick Garland.
I mean, the issue, of course, is that what they will do is they'll get some kind of sample of the document, some kind of leak or something. Somehow they'll find out some fragment, and they'll just take a line, a paragraph, and they will cherry pick it, and then it will make it look like Joe Biden was with Vladimir Putin and President Xi throwing back drinks and talking about how they're going to take over the world. And they'll say whatever they want. I mean, Jesse Waters went on Fox News the other night and just made up a whole narrative about what's in those documents. And that's what they'll just continue to do. And it's just sucks.
I mean, they're going to do this anyway. It's really...
But they weren't going to do it anyway, because they weren't going to say that. But this was such an egregious thing that Trump had done. It was very, I mean, we'd seen other people take documents, but like what Trump had done, he was being investigated for, and every legal analyst is saying it's a slam dunk that he's going to get indicted for those documents. And now,
well, no, I don't think that changes very much. I mean, honestly, when you had people on Twitter going, "Holy shit, Merrick Garland took only 12 days or 8 days to get a special prosecutor on this." They're morons to be upset about that. Merrick Garland did that to make it easier for the special prosecutor to indict Trump if he needs to. This is not all, that the shitbirds out there on the right-wing media sphere are going to misstate or claim it's not a big deal, or that they're going to do this anyway, and they were going to do it no matter what. And, one of the things that's funny about it to me is that these guys are out there a month ago saying none of this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And now they're in a contradictory position where now they're saying, oh my God, it's the biggest deal of all.
Well, because they've got a hook now for their oversight committees, for their investigation committees. It's the Biden classified documents. We're going to be seeing an investigation, and it's a legitimate investigation.
It's totally legit to investigate, but there is no evidence that Biden did any of the actually felonious things that we know Trump did. Right? We know that Trump refused to turn him over.
Yeah.
We know, for instance, another hilarious thing, we know that the FBI did their raid at Mar-a-Lago intentionally out of uniform quietly, and it was the Trump people who publicized it.
Yeah, and it wasn't a raid, it was a search. It was a search.
So these guys are going to do what they do, and as in that case, we'll see if this really turns out to be something they have handled intelligently. I would suspect that not.
Joe Biden and his people are going to have to explain a very believable narrative as to where those documents came from, how they got there, what they were, and why he had them to try their best to debunk and, if possible, declassify them and share them with journalists.
Sure. And this is early days in this, right? I mean, it's such catnip for journalists, and I totally get why, right? It makes sense. I'm not one of those people who says, I can't believe the New York Times is reporting this. Of course, they have to report it. It's obviously a story. But I just don't. I think we're in the first inning of this phase of this, and I just think people need to relax. It's not going to be nearly as important in the end as everyone imagines.
How important will this George Santos be? You've been paying attention to him. It's been heavily analyzed. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on it, but do you think his days are certainly numbered or not?
Yes. Yeah, I think his days are numbered. Because it's clear that there is probably quite a bit of actually illegal activity that happened in his campaign. There's what caught my interest, especially, was a guy named Intrater, not Intrater, but Intrater, who is Victor Vekselberg's, I want to say nephew or cousin, at least, who handles Victor Vekselberg's money in the U.S. And Intrater is the cousin. Vekselberg is the Russian oligarch who is in Putin's inner circle. So you're going to have like a very there's that sexy thing, again, quite a hook, that you have this by one remove, a crony of the Russian leader putting money into an American political campaign. But that's actually not going to be the thing that brings him down. What's going to bring him down is going to be that they have, for instance, a PAC that they raised hundreds of thousands of dollars with that was never registered. And the money just kind of went out there. You also see things like our friend George Santos, if that's his real name, to be fair, had a bunch of restaurant receipts that were all $199.
Yeah. What was that about?
It was with these guys in, I want to say, Brooklyn or Queens, who have a history of something crazy, like smuggling and, gold forgery or something. Like these guys own this restaurant are a couple of crooks. And they were obviously laundering money, I think, through the restaurant. And that's just two of all these many things out there on Santos where they're just one of these things is going to turn out to be an obvious felony. He's going to get arrested and he's going to get booted out. And that's probably sooner than later because I think it's really obvious that he's a fucking crook.
Yeah, so, this guy we haven't seen. He's going to get, that name is going to go down in infamy. I mean, it's going to be one of the biggest stories for years. And it's good that you can't at this point get away with being a complete imposter about everything. I mean, it's really hurting the New York, these Republicans in New York that just won their seats in Congress, like 6 of them. It's killing them. They're demanding because it's all they get asked about, obvious. But okay,
here's the thing, though. Yeah. If you notice the leadership of the Republican Party in the House is not just not pushing him out. They're actually going to give him a committee seat.
Yeah.
Or 2 or 3.
Because they need his vote.
They need his vote. But this for the GOP in general is real bad, not just for the locals in New York, because, this just so clearly underlines what absolute shit they are and that they don't care about anything except McCarthy holding on to that seat. And Santos really kind of underlines that in a really beautiful way. And, it's this. Santos is the perfect epitome of what the modern Republican Party has become. Because, and by the way, if there were no felonies to be found with him, they would never push him out. They would just say, oops, he lied on his resume. Fuck you. And that would be it. And the MAGA base would have no problem voting for him again. They would see that as a feature.
No, I don't think so. I don't think in New York. I don't think in his district.
I'm saying the MAGA base, like the real hardcore MAGA people, they'd be like, who cares that this guy lied to us?
Maybe.
We're pro-life and Trump has had a lot of, paid for abortions. So what? Herschel Walker. So what? So it really is like it underlines the depths to which the modern GOP has fallen.
Well, it's winning is everything. If you talk about that football game, any football game, it doesn't matter how you win. You deflate the ball. You make them look the other way. You throw salt in their eyes. You capture the opponent quarterback's family and blackmail him to throw the game. As long as you win, morally playing by the rules, that's how it is.
No, that's for suckers. That's for suckers because when all you've got is reactionary politics, then anything is justified to defeat the enemy. When
you say when all you've got is reactionary politics, the converse of that, or the norm, is you've got policies, you've got an agenda, you've got goals, you've got a platform, things that you want to achieve, and void of that, they're just reacting to things. Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah. So actually, they don't have any. Their ideology is really in the same plane as fascism, right? They think that they are the elect who should be running the country, and that the cosmopolitan elites like us, foreigners, immigrants, whatever, they are the enemy. And and it's based upon, it's all grievance politics. It's, my life kind of sucks, or I haven't done as well as I can, and it's somebody else's fault. Right. And so it's reactionary in the sense that I have a grievance, and anyone that is not of me is the enemy, no matter what they think. And it's not conservative because they don't really give a shit about conservative politics at all either. Those things are just old Republican Party establishment things. Now, a lot of their things they believe in are conservative, but they voted for Trump, who is the worst possible pro-life candidate ever. All the pro-lifers voted for him simply because he hated the people they hate. That's it.
To be conservative means to just be a dick to people who aren't.
No, that's being reactionary. No, I have a lot of conservative friends who are very straight up good people who. Yeah, no,
I mean
whatever.
To be right, fair enough. Thank you for correcting. Not to be conservative, but today's. We're not even calling them conservatives because they're not. I mean, they might be religiously, they might be very into 1 or 2 or 3 issues: guns, God, and abortion. Yeah. But the rest of it, trade or foreign policy or economics or healthcare, or
especially economics, they don't care.
Right.
They're the welfare for me, but not for the people.
Right. Well,
if they get it, it's not welfare. If you get it, you're a parasite on America.
You and I are talking to Monday, and the U.S. debt ceiling the U.S. could hit the debt ceiling within days. I'm going to be talking to Dean Baker about this after you.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think it's June is the real. They can play a lot of games until June and keep it from hitting before then. And June is by June certainly.
What are your thoughts on the politics of this? This happened in 2011. They brought it to the brink, and it really apparently hurt the economy for months after. As a result, real damage is done to the economy when they play with this. It's just a bullshit political cudgel, and everybody loses. But maybe they don't believe that. They did it before. So what are your thoughts on this? What are you hearing might happen? Didn't you say something about them printing a coin?
Yes, the $1 trillion coin, which I think is amazing and hilarious. So first off, the Constitution literally says that the executive branch will pay the debts of the country. In the Constitution, it's quite explicit that we don't do this, that it's not constitutional. I think that what we're going to see,
it's not constitutional to not pay our debtors. You have to pay our debts. You have to pay them, and if you say we're not going to by not raising this debt ceiling, that's what they're saying. That's that's against the Constitution.
This isn't new spending, by the way. We should be clear. This is paying off other spending that we already borrowed money.
Right.
And so the politics are very interesting because I don't think that the Republicans in the House give a shit about hurting the economy. They would probably see that as a conservative friend of me said while watching the football game. He said, they probably think good. We'll ruin the economy and it'll hurt Democrats' chances in 2024.
Well, yeah.
Right now, he also said that is insanely stupid because no one's going to look at Biden and say, we can't believe you fucked this up. They're going to look at the Republicans in the House and say, we can't believe you fucked this up. So I think this is a train, two trains hurtling towards each other, where the GOP in the House can pull the switch and keep them from colliding, but they're going to be too stupid to avoid it. They're going to remember they live in their own media silo, and they're not going to be paying attention to even Mitch McConnell saying this is crazy. They're going to convince themselves it's like finally someone has the balls to stand up to the system, and we're going to crush these guys. So they're going to keep going. The White House, on the other hand, is going to be more responsible, but they're in a position where they're like, look, we know the GOP just is going to pay for this forever. So if these clowns want to get to that point where they pull this trigger and cause all these problems, we're not going to get blamed for that bad economy. It's going to get blamed on them. And then we will be the guys to come in and save the day later to fix it. So you have both sides incentivized. The Democrats, I think, correctly saying we can't be blackmailed. And you've got the House Republicans who are saying, like, all we have is blackmail. Right? So they're going to go and try to force this thing through. And I think it'll go on for weeks. I think it'll be real bad.
The talking point has been that apparently Joe Biden said this is not something we negotiate over, and Republicans are saying he has to negotiate. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, and Mitch McConnell privately is saying the same thing Joe Biden's saying. McConnell would say, okay, you get something for it. You get some minor thing. But if it comes to, they're saying, let's cut Social Security. That's what they want. They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut all these things.
But they want to privatize Social Security.
Yeah, they want to privatize it. They want to get rid of the IRS. I mean, they basically want to destroy the functional foundations of
the administrative state.
Right. And that is not something that quite literally 90% of Americans want. So why would you allow yourself to be blackmailed into that?
Yeah.
So Democrats are going to not do it. We're going to have a big fight. And we'll see who breaks first. I suspect it's going to be the 10 or 15 or 20 House Republicans who are in districts where they can't be seen to let this happen. And so there's 18 Republicans right now who are in districts that Biden won by more than like 3 or 4. And then there's another 18 or 20 who are in basically even districts. Do you want to be that guy in 2024 and be part of the guys who voted to crash the economy? No fucking way.
Right.
So that's where we're headed. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be definitely ugly.
Speaking of ugly, I wanted to get your take. You're watching like day to day, hour to hour. You're following international media, including media in Ukraine and Russia, and translations and military bloggers, and of course foreign policy experts. Always really great to talk to as a resource and able to kind of explain it to us in a way that's important and interesting. Russia's war in Ukraine, a Russian missile, just some recent headlines, a Russian missile strike in an apartment building in Dnipro, in central Ukraine, has left at least 40 people dead, making it one of the deadliest single attacks of the war. I believe that's on civilians, to be clear, right? A weekend wave of Russian strikes has led to emergency power cuts from many regions. The mayor of Kiev said the collapse of the country's energy infrastructure could quote, happen at any second. There's a lot of talk about weapons. UK, the British Defense Secretary announcing a donation of battle tanks for Ukraine, saying troops need a new level of support. Other Americans like Alex Vindman calling for give them everything, give them planes, everything that they need. I saw you, I think, disagreeing with that. But what is the latest at this point in the war? Almost, I guess it'll be a year in February.
Sure. February 24th will be 1 year. So let me start with some specifics and then go to sort of general. The reason I was giving Vindman a bit of stick is that the people who are screaming about sending, every possible thing to Ukraine take zero attention or pay zero attention to thinking about what Ukraine can actually support. Right? I mean, they have a certain amount of logistical ability, which means repairing, delivering, maintaining, fueling, training to use these systems. If we just throw willy-nilly all kinds of stuff at them, they're not going to have the ability to ingest it and use it in any useful way. And they're going to be then presented with all these sort of difficult choices because there's going to be political pressure. For instance, there was a rumor that Britain was going to give Ukraine Apache helicopters. It takes 18 months at minimum to learn how to use one. But if Britain gives them those helicopters, the political pressure in Ukraine to get them trained and used will be so intense that they're going to have to divert some of their logistical ability to support that to the detriment of things they need a lot more of, like artillery, etc. So that was why I was giving Vindman a hard time.
Also, the Polish prime minister calling on Germany to supply all sorts of weapons to Ukraine and other along those lines.
Yeah, so I am totally a fan of giving Ukraine everything that they can use effectively as soon as possible to address their immediate military needs. But to just throw stuff at them doesn't do that. It clogs up how things work. It also creates escalation issues, right? Which still are out there. People, I don't think this is going nuclear, but just the idea that if we start saying, look, we're sending a fleet of F-16s over there, you start creating more instability in a war that we really, really want to stay stable. We want Ukraine to win, but we want them to win in an established fashion that allows the Russian political sphere to not explode when it happens. Because the only thing worse than a Russia that's still together is a Russia with 6,000 nukes completely falling apart. Right? And as much as I want the Ukrainians to kick ass, but we don't need a Ottoman Empire falling apart with tons of nukes floating around. On those missiles, those were ballistic missiles that Ukraine has no ability to shoot down.
The ones that killed the 40
exactly
civilians.
They're coming in at too high a speed from too high of an angle. They can't be hit except by literally incredible luck.
75 more injured, 46 still reported missing. The Air Force Command of Ukraine Armed Forces said the Russian Kh-22 missile, an older and less accurate weapon than most modern missiles we use in a strike. The Kh-22.
So they fired those, right? Those unhittable missiles. They fired 12. I think they have 40. No, I'm sorry, they have 38 left. These are not, the Russians don't have enormous stockpiles of these missiles sitting around to fire at Ukraine. And again, they just pointed out the inaccuracy. So when you're saying that the mayor of Kiev is saying our power could just go out forever at any near point, I honestly don't think that's true. I think it's a smart propaganda move to get more air defenses from the West, but I just don't think that that's a thing that's really going to happen.
Did you hear the story about the German defense minister resigning?
Yeah, so that is a long time in coming.
Yeah, because I just read it just real quick. You might were about to say this. I guess this guy Lambrecht, or woman Christine Lambrecht,
yes.
resigned following growing skepticism about her suitability for the role against the backdrop of the Ukraine war. She's faced criticism as Germany is under increasing pressure to ramp up military support for Ukraine, which has been insignificant compared to support from other Western allies during her time as minister. At the outbreak of the war, apparently, Bill, she pledged to deliver 5,000 helmets as military assistance. And I don't know anything, but I read that as kind of a symbolic insult of like, we're not doing anything to help you. Sending helmets at the beginning of the...
Yeah, like German defense minister since the end of the Cold War has been like where you park somebody for a while.
Oh, really?
It's like a prestige post that they don't, as you can see by the state of the German army, the Germans could not put together more than about 2 brigades of combat troops right now. They got a pretty big army. It's so badly equipped that they really couldn't fight a war. The Poles could conquer Germany in about a week. They just don't have the military anymore.
Wow.
And so she's particularly egregiously bad because she does have, no offense to all of my fellow German friends out there, but she has that particular German smugness where she kind of is like, if only all you savages would stop being so savage, the world would be more like us and the world would be a better place. And it's pretty crazy. And she made other more absurd statements about various things the Ukrainians needed or wanted to do. And she was one of the ones holding on to the idea that there needed to be, negotiations earlier. So she sucks. She's going to be gone. Here's why it's a big deal, though. It probably tells you Germany's going to ramp up what they're giving Ukraine.
Yeah, well, they're
associated with the old policy.
Under a lot of pressure to do that, apparently.
Right, and she's associated with the old policy, and I suspect what that means is the Germans are going to hand over some tanks pretty soon.
Tanks!
And they're getting... Yeah, and by the way, this is a funny thing, because remember not long ago we were all talking about how tanks, well, all us nerdy McNerdsters were talking about how tanks are obsolete now.
Yeah, I was saying that. I've been saying that for a long time, but based on nothing. I don't know anything about combat or war, but it would seem that, yeah.
You were basing it on what we saw early in the war, where the Ukrainians were slaughtering the Russians in tanks using javelins. And that condition still persists. That's still the way that the Russians were trying to use tanks, which was frankly the way, say, the Germans were using them in 1941, is no longer tenable. But using tanks carefully in a certain way still works, and it's still really important to have them. And so what you're seeing now is like, when you see Elon Musk go like, oh, tanks are obsolete, as if he fucking knows a thing about it, whereas the Ukrainians are saying, give us a ton more. What those tanks are for is launching an offensive. These are not defensive tanks. Ukraine has to break. This is sort of like World War I, where the end of World War I, most people don't know, turned into a really intense maneuver war at the end, after the trenches got broken through by, guess what, tanks, right? And so what you're seeing here is Ukraine wants the ability to, if they get through the Russian lines, they want armor that they can fire down a road and go 150 miles to break a Russian front. So that's what that's really about. And where we are right now is interesting because Russia kind of has the initiative right now. Ukraine's holding the line everywhere. And Russia is pounding on Bakhmut and Soledar and those places. And it's very interesting because I think Ukraine's trying to preserve their army for an offensive later. But the Russians are pounding away at Bakhmut and Soledar. They're using up a lot of the reserves they built up. And what's fascinating about that battle is it's not a battle for Ukraine. It's a battle for Moscow. It's Prigozhin and the radicals trying to win the political battle in Moscow by looking like the most effective people out there, effective Russian military out there. And then it's the Russian Ministry of Defense doing the same thing in other places around, in Soledar and some other places. So it's really fascinating. Russia is still in this place where they're fighting a war of their own politics.
It sounds like something that we have done in places like Iraq or Afghanistan. We kept switching generals and switching different military strategies and, clear, hold, build. And if we just, and all of these different things, fighting insurgencies in the end is hard to do. And eventually we left both countries worse off. But the domestic politics as a result of announcing this or that strategy, the surge, I mean, it sounds just like that, to be honest with you.
It's interesting that this is really crazy.
And we perpetuated those wars with those bullshit surges and strategies and phony explanations for our interests.
Yeah, for domestic political reasons, which is really crazy. And the Russians, in both cases, the initial start of the war was to address a perceived foreign policy requirement, right? Or political requirement, or an attack against you, whatever way you want to put it. But then very quickly, the war becomes about who's going to be in control and in power back home. And what's interesting that happened last week is that Shoigu, Gerasimov, all the older guys that got pushed out 6 months ago, they were all put back in charge of the Ministry of Defense. It's literally the return of the old guard back in charge. And I think that what that says is that Putin realized he was giving Prigozhin and these guys too much power.
Wow.
And so there's this whole balancing act going on that's being in Moscow that's being expressed as a military strategy in Ukraine, which still tells you the Russians have their heads still completely up their ass. It's really wild, and it's wild to watch. And I think this is now just turning into a stress test of Russia's domestic political regime and how long it can keep this up before things start to fall apart there. I don't think the war will be won in Ukraine. I think it's going to have to be won in Moscow. Anything else? Not really. Just waiting for the shoe to drop on the the debt issue. And then, by the way, right behind that, guess what's going to come up months later? The budget. So the next 12 months are going to be super intense fights in D.C. Waiting to see if Trump gets indicted, waiting to see, there's a lot going on around. There's a lot of balls in the air right now. And I think it's going to be a momentous year, hopefully in a good way. Well, we'll keep talking to you. Help us understand exactly what's happening there and why we need to know. Always appreciate it, my friend. Thank you. That was awesome as always. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, there he goes, Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C. Everybody go follow him on Twitter right now. And I'm very excited to have Dean Baker now joining me on the show. He co-founded the Center for Economic and Policy Research, where he's now, back in 1999, he's now a senior economist there. He's the author of several books, including Rigged, Globalization and the Rules of Modern Economy Restructured to Make the Rich Richer. His blog, Beat the Press, is so good. I subscribe to it. I just subscribed to him on Patreon, too. It's just $1. You can go subscribe to him on Patreon for $1 a month. But Beat the Press provides commentary on economic reporting. His analysis has appeared pretty much everywhere. The Washington Post, The Atlantic, London Financial Times, and so much more. Like I said, he's written several other books as well. He's on Twitter at DeanBaker13. Subscribe to all their work. CEPR.net. Time to catch up with the great Dean Baker. Dean Baker, thank you very much for joining me, sir.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Pete.
Yeah, we go back. There's a lot to talk about. We've been talking on and off over the years, and I think that like the history of our economy and the things that you've predicted matter a lot, and you've predicted so many different things. But I just want to start with kind of where we're at as we're talking right now. You have a great piece about the current state of the economy, which you say seems to be pretty good in terms of, you write, it looks like the Fed has largely accomplished its mission of taming inflation without bringing on a recession. Plenty of things can mess this picture up, like another COVID surge or escalation of the war in Ukraine. But for now, the economy is looking very good. Take it from there. Tell me the John McCain's infamous quote, the fundamentals of the economy are good.
Well, they really are this time. For people who don't remember, John McCain was saying that as the economy was collapsing, the housing bubble was going down the tubes and bringing the economy with it. So his assessment didn't fit the facts that time. But this time, the economy is looking very good. So obviously, we all were concerned about inflation, some more than others. But in any case, inflation was clearly too high for comfort in 2021 and first half of 2022. But it slowed sharply. I mean, that was what the Fed was trying to do with its rate hikes, how much credit they should get for that, as opposed to how much it would have slowed in any case as supply chain problems got resolved. We could argue that, but I'm happy to give them some of the credit. I think it was the right thing to raise interest rates. And what we've seen is that areas that were really big problems. We had all these supply chain areas, things like furniture, appliances, cars, old used cars. Prices were going through the roof in 2021, 2022, and they since have stopped rising, and many of those are falling. In fact, the most recent data, used car prices were plummeting, and even new car prices were heading down. But that area is largely under control. Housing's a huge factor, a huge chunk of the CPI, a huge chunk of people's budget. Housing prices were soaring to end of 221, first part of 222. It seems to be slowing. And this is, I won't get into the technical stuff here, but the point is we have market rents, private indexes of market rents, units that come on the market. And those show house prices, rents have actually stopped rising, are falling in many parts of the country. So that will show up in the government's data sometime 223, but we know that's coming. So when we look across the economy, it looks like inflation's under control. Other part of the story, are we still creating jobs? Is unemployment still low? Answer, yes. I mean, 3.5% unemployment. It's the lowest that's been in the last half century. That's pretty damn good. And there's really not much evidence that's about to change, at least anytime soon. I mean, we're all concerned with the Fed raising rates that would throw us into a recession, that the unemployment rate would go up 1.5%, 2%. Many economists saying we needed that. Larry Summers, of course, being the most prominent. But in any case, that doesn't seem to be the case. We still see, looks like a strong labor market. Wages are rising more than inflation. So workers are coming out ahead. And this, it's really a good story.
Tell me a little bit more about wages and workers coming out ahead, because I think that's been a really interesting outcome of the economy and workers having a lot more bargaining power. And you write about, and this stuff can be tracked, that people actually are quitting to get, for any number of reasons that anybody would want to quit a job, to get a better job.
Yeah, and to my view, this is a really great story. So it's kind of funny when you read the business press, because oftentimes I'll be talking to business owners, and they're going, "It's horrible. We can't keep workers. We have to raise wages. We have to let them work remotely. We have to have flexible work schedules." I look at that and go, well, that's a really good story. So workers have bargaining power that they haven't had for really quite some time. I mean, if you have a union, that's great, and unions give you some bargaining power, but the reality is most people don't. So you get bargaining power when you have a tight labor market, and we have a tight labor market now. And what we've seen is that workers' wages, particularly as you go down the ladder, lowest paid workers seem to be getting the highest wages. And people jump on me for this. Well, if you get a 10% wage, but you're only getting $12 an hour, you're still doing poorly. That's right. But if you got a 10% wage, you're doing considerably better than before you had the 10% wage increase. So what we've seen is that workers at the bottom, if you look at categories like hotel and restaurant work, very low paid work, they've actually come out well ahead of inflation through the pandemic, and looks like that's going to continue. So this is a good story. Again, I don't have a crystal ball that could change. We could see something, a monkey wrench in things. But for now, things look comparatively good for most people in the economy.
What would you say about the outlook for the American labor movement? I've been following that as long as I've been following these issues. You obviously write a lot about it, support organized labor. We know about the story of American labor movement in the U.S., but recently they've gained so much more leverage and strength through traditional ways and organizing. And now Michigan, because they turned Democrat in the House and the whole state House, that's all Democrats, they can change the law. They would be the first state to go from the anti-union quote, right to work, or as my union friends say, right to work for less, to back to strengthening those labor principles that they once had. What do you make of the larger outlook on the labor movement, sir?
Well, it's great to see, even organizing drives at places that have never been organized before. So, of course, Amazon, there was the incident where they had a warehouse at Staten Island. They organized successfully. Enormous opposition from the company. They did everything they could to prevent it. But you had a grassroots movement, a lot of young people just saying, hey, we could organize here. And they did. It was a fantastic story. Starbucks, of course, many Starbucks have now become organized. That's a great story. There's a number of other, there have been efforts to organize at Apple at their stores. So we're seeing efforts in a number of areas where there'd been little or no unions at all for decades, maybe ever. If you talk about something like Amazon, of course, never had one, Starbucks. And that's a great thing to see. And it's great also to see the support. The Biden administration has been the most pro-labor administration. Maybe you could argue Johnson. I mean, you have to go back a long time. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And he's been very supportive of unions, and that's a great thing. One of the things that is Lena Khan, the head of the Federal Trade Commission, this usually doesn't get a lot of attention. The FTC doesn't get a lot of attention, but she's doing a lot there. And one of the really big things she did is she's proposing to outlaw non-compete agreements. And again, this is kind of a nerdy thing that I think most people aren't familiar with. But we've seen this explosion of non-compete agreements where workers are forced to sign contracts that say if they leave their job, they won't work in the same industry. Now, you can argue that that made sense when you're talking about, say, high-tech sector where you might have all these secrets that Apple's developing this or that. You can argue that. I mean, I'm not even going to say there it's appropriate, but you can at least argue that. But it's utterly absurd, some of the places. They've had pizza places. So you quit the pizza job or you get fired maybe. But they say because you have a non-compete agreement, you can't go across the street and work at another pizza place. I mean, close to nuts. But the Biden administration is saying that that's an illegal restraint on trade and they want to outlaw it. Now, she's put the proposal on the table. It'll be a while before it actually goes into effect. But that would be a great thing. It just, in a lot of cases, these might not even be legal and enforceable, but no one should have to worry about that. If you can get a better job, you should be able to go across the street and get a better job. I'm
surprised the Department of Labor, she's the Labor Secretary of Labor?
No. Federal Trade Commission.
Oh, FTC, you said. Yeah, I'm surprised that the FTC, I mean, it's a regulatory agency, I guess, so they have the ability to change certain regulations, but it's always confusing as to what needs to go through regular legislation in Congress, but that non-compete.
Well, this will be contested, just to be clear. I mean, she put it on the table. They have a process where people comment on it, and I'll guarantee you it's going to court, but it's great to see them trying to do that.
These are the types of laws, though, or regulations that get passed through lobbyists and lobby that most of us have no idea is even existing. You, of course, are well in the know and covering these types of things. But that's how things like this get changed. Before you know it, you're signing one of those agreements and then you can't go work somewhere else. There's a lot more there. But let me ask you about something else that's super important in terms of the economy, in terms of where we're at right now, and in terms of where we're about to be, obviously, which is this debt ceiling issue, which you and I have talked about this in the past because I talked to you during the Obama years when Republicans were in charge of Congress. What's the easiest way to explain this issue to people that for some reason, don't understand it? I mean, this is money that we already owe, right?
Yeah. No, it's reasonable people to understand it because it really is anomalous. I think there's one other country in the world that has a debt ceiling. So just to be clear what's going on here, Congress appropriates spending. So, if we're upset, Congress is government's spending too much, Congress appropriated the money. So we aren't actually talking about spending. Congress passed laws, passed spending, and the government's supposed to spend the money that Congress has appropriated. What the debt ceiling is about is how much can the government borrow to cover that spending. So we get the tax revenue, of course, and we're short. I'd have to check the latest numbers, but roughly $1 trillion. I mean, that sounds like a really big number, but relative to the economy, it's not that big. We've had bigger deficits, but that's roughly what we're talking about in terms of the deficit. So how do you make up the deficit? You borrow. Okay, and the debt ceiling says how much can you borrow in total? And we're going to be hitting that ceiling. And this is where the Republicans in the House are saying, we're not going to let you borrow. So the absurdity is Congress passed the law. They told President Biden, you're supposed to spend the money. But he's being told, you can't borrow to spend the money. And, again, it's this absurdity. I don't know how, suppose President Biden were just to say, okay, you told me to spend the money, I'm going to spend the money. And he has to borrow to do it. Well, what would the court say? Would he be able to do that? I don't know the answer to that. And I know that's something that the Biden administration is considering. They're just saying, the law tells me I'm supposed to spend the money. How could I not spend the money that I've been told by Congress to spend? So it's not clear what he's supposed to do. Now, obviously, what the Republicans are hoping is they're going to get really big concessions. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut all these programs that are hugely important to tens of millions of people. Now, they could have run on this. They could have said, hey, we're going to pass legislation in Congress cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare. Needless to say, that'd be hugely unpopular. The vast majority of Republicans support these programs, so they don't want to see them cut. But instead of actually putting legislation through Congress, they're basically looking to hold the government hostage and say, hey, we're going to mess up financial markets, because if the government can't spend, we can't pay interest on the debt, we can't meet all these obligations, you're talking about an absolutely chaotic situation. And given that, basically government debt is the foundation of not just the U.S. financial system, but the world financial system, it really is going to have a huge impact. So it's, again, I don't think the comparison to hostage taking is inappropriate. That's really what we're talking about here, because that's how they're hoping to bring, huge changes to very important social programs. And, I'm quite certain the Biden administration's not going to go along with that. So we'll have to see how that standoff gets resolved.
You have offered some solutions. I'll pass them along to Ron Klain, Dean. But I mean, there's anything from, making $1 trillion coin to some other ideas. This idea of buying bonds that you mentioned, which are priced lower now because of interest rates, my understanding. I have this right. I mean, what you could do some things, couldn't you?
Yeah. So the $1 trillion coin, people jump on that as a gimmick, and it is. It's a silly gimmick. There's a law that was passed back in the 80s it was pushed through by a member who had platinum mines in his district. So he passed a law trying to encourage the government to mint platinum coins. So it says that the government can mint platinum coins in any denomination. So the story is they'll mint $1 trillion coin, hand it over to the Federal Reserve Board, and get $1 trillion. That won't count as debt, because that would be treated as they gave them an asset, just as if they sold off a pile of land or whatever. So that wouldn't add to the debt, and that would cover our bills for, quite some time. That's something they could do. The thing I suggest that this is, simpler, it doesn't resolve the problem, but buys them time. If we issued debt back in 2020, 2021, the interest rate on, say, a 10-year bond back then was 1%, maybe a little bit over. The market value of those bonds is considerably less today because interest rates have risen. The interest rate on 10-year treasuries, I'd have to look, I think it's about 3.5%. Those bonds will sell at a 15%, maybe 20% discount. We could buy those up. The debt is measured based on the face value. So we buy up a $1,000 bond that's now selling for $800. Well, we only have to borrow $800 to get rid of $1,000 in debt. So that could buy you some time. I'd have to go through and look more carefully as to exactly how much time, but certainly 4, 5, 6 months and maybe longer. So these are things that the government could do. Again, it's the sort of, they're silly things. We should never be in this situation. Right. But it certainly makes more sense to mint a platinum coin, or I call it the Treasury bond shuffle, to put off the debt ceiling rather than, throwing the world economy into a financial crisis, which is what the Republicans apparently are prepared to do.
It's another thing that the rest of the world looks at the U.S. and goes, I can't believe that's how they run, that they're in this situation, this debt ceiling circus. The other question about it, though, is that you've been covering this for a long time, and Republicans have used this kind of economic terrorism, hostage taking in the past. In 2011, it's my understanding it did damage to the economy. Like, at what point does it start to do damage to the economy? And when you look at economic history, recent history over the last, 15 years with Republicans in majorities allowing them to do this, what has happened?
Yeah, well, there are two stories here. One is the immediate problems of running up against the debt ceiling. And we saw this back in 2011. Interest rates went up quite a bit. I'd have to double check the exact amounts. But if we're talking about, say, 10-year bonds, probably around 0.3, 0.4, which is a lot, to go up in a very short period of time. And that gets passed on. People are seeing higher mortgage interest rates, car loans. It gets passed on to everything. So that has a big impact. Now, it came down again when we made a deal. But, the period leading up to, okay, are we going to hit the debt ceiling? We saw a big run up in interest rates. And again, that was worldwide, too. So it wasn't just the U.S. The other story was, as a condition of agreeing to the debt ceiling, the Obama administration agreed to big budget cuts. And, Republicans were very happy about that, I gather, but that had the impact of slowing the economy. So we had a very slow recovery from the Great Recession. And a big part of that was the budget cuts that the Republicans demanded in exchange for agreeing to raising the debt ceiling. Now, the great thing, to my view, the great thing Biden administration did, we had the really big Recovery Act passed back in February, just after he took office, February 2021. Economy came soaring back. We got an unemployment rate down under 4%, 3.5%. That's a fantastic story. So we didn't do what was done on the Obama administration, where we had a very slow recovery. Took us long time to get down to low rates of unemployment. So that's a great story. But the Republicans, I don't think it's a secret. They want a bad economy for 2024 because obviously it will increase their chances of winning that election. So they both want to cut Social Security, Medicare, or other social programs that people depend on. But I think they want to weaken the economy quite deliberately in order to improve their chances of winning in the next election.
They've done it before. And it arguably was effective. So, a couple different ways to look at it.
It definitely hurt Obama's popularity. I don't think anyone will quote that.
Also, it was just like that's when they did all these austerity measurements. At the same time, Obama was trying to push and support the American Jobs Act, this big infrastructure bill, which went nowhere. But he was out there giving speeches. He was traveling around. Meanwhile, Republicans were cutting. They were cutting government spending, which just really hurt the economy. If that's the same, I think that's the time you're talking about, right?
Exactly. Second term. Exactly. So that was the condition of approving an increase in the debt ceiling, that he had to big cuts to the budget.
And so it would not be surprising to see something similar in this case.
Absolutely. I would almost be surprised that they don't insist on it. Again, what Biden could do at the end of the day, we'll have to see. I mean, he's been through, obviously Biden was through this. He was the one actually doing much of the negotiating with the Republicans in Congress. So he's been around the block on this, and I think he's prepared to stand tough on it. And again, what that means exactly, I don't know, but he's not gonna just cave. I think we can count on that.
You've been writing for a long time. Last thing I want to talk about is one larger issue. You've been writing for a long time about and arguing with folks about markets and debating the whole idea of the free market versus government's role in intervention. You've got a piece at your blog. Why debate markets when government? Why debate markets versus government when we let the right rig the market? You reference this new book written by, I think her name is Katerina Pistor, The Code of Capital, How the Law Creates Wealth and Inequality. But you've been writing about this, several books, endless blog posts about this for a long time. You've been having this argument, and you just briefly in this piece, but you've written at length for a long time, say, listen, there's no free market. This doesn't exist. It's not the reality of economics. It never has been. It's rigged in so many different ways. Tell me just a little bit about this, and folks really have to learn more about it.
Yeah, well, the basic point here is that we don't have a market that's just given. So we have these discussions as though, do you want the market or do you want the government to do this? Right. And the point I'm making here, and was made in Katerina Pistor's book, that the markets are constructed. The government constructs the market, and we could do it any thousands and thousands of different ways. And just, the one I harp on, just because it seems so obvious and it's huge money and it's people's health. Patent monopolies. So patent monopolies make prescription drugs expensive. Everyone says prescription drugs are expensive. The government should do something. The government has done something. They've made prescription drugs expensive. If you didn't have patent monopolies, if all drugs were just sold in the free market as generics, in almost all cases, they would be cheap. And there's hundreds of billions of dollars a year at issue here. So we'll spend somewhere in the order of $550 billion on prescription drugs this year. That's about 60% of the military budget. This is real money. If we snapped our fingers, no patent monopolies, other types of protection, we just disappeared those, we'd be spending less than $100 billion. Drugs would be cheap. Huge amount of money. Where does that go to? Well, of course, it goes in drug companies' pockets. A lot of people get very rich. Moderna, we created 5 Moderna billionaires off the COVID vaccine that the government actually paid to develop. So, we're arguing about government versus market. Well, let's get rid of patent monopolies. Again, we have to pay for developing drugs. I get that, and I've written about that. There are other ways to do it. But that's just the most obvious example. I'll just mention one other. The whole issue of corporation. This is something Pistor talks about. The whole the invention of a corporation. You and I could have a partnership. But if you and I have a partnership and we do something that damages our neighbor, we dump waste on their lawn and, the kids get sick or whatever, they sue you and me. But if we form a corporation, then they sue the corporation. You and I walk away. We go, oh, yeah, you got the money from the corporate. Oh, they're bankrupt. Oh, too bad, guys.
Right.
That's a market creation. And, this is obviously a simple story, but that actually does happen all the time, that corporations, because they're legal individuals separate from the shareholders, we give them all sorts of rights, including the ability to damage people and protect the shareholders. So I could go on and on and on.
Just give me one more, though, if you could, that I've always been fascinated about, that I try to use as an example. A shorter way of saying what you're saying here, correct me if I'm wrong, is when people say government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, the truth is government always, by its very nature, is picking winners and losers in terms of what they are incentivizing, what they are themselves buying, what laws they are creating that makes it harder or easier to make things here, to sell things here, and so on and so forth. I wonder if you could just do something with energy and the way that we subsidize one form versus another form, which is, to me, it's always been the clearest example of how markets are rigged.
Well, with energy, obviously we know about global warming. We can't pretend like it's not optional. It kind of kills me the way the media talks about this, that they don't recognize global, like, do you recognize, the sun? It's, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you could argue global warming. You can't today. Okay. So we should say, okay, you've damaged us. We should tell the fossil fuel industry, you've damaged us with emitting huge amounts of greenhouse gases. You're going to pay for that. And we don't do that. And the analogy I used, just as I was talking about before, it's like, oh, my neighbor throws their sewage on my lawn, and I just go, oh, that's the free market. That's in effect what we've done with the fossil fuel industry and global warming. We've just said, oh, you get to mess up the whole planet. We're all going to suffer, and we are suffering already, and it'll get much worse with the flooding in California. Go to the developing country, 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater. Yeah. And we just tell the fossil fuel industry, oh, well, whatever, that's the free market. And yeah, that's absurd.
It's external costs. And by the way, they knew, just another study came out, that they've known forever the damage that they were doing. It's not like they were completely.
Yeah, no, give them credit. They did their homework and then they lied about it. Yeah. So they knew. I forget how far back. I think it was like 1980 or something. So this wasn't something that they just, maybe there's something to what all these people are saying. They knew this long ago, and they did everything they could to conceal the information.
Hey, man, I appreciate you talking to me. It's been way too long. I've always been a big fan of Beat the Press and your reporting on economic reporting, what they get wrong. Is there anything else that you want to plug or promote other than, that? You're big on YouTube, or at least you're big on this one YouTube channel I saw, which is pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. I have a series, the Institute for New Economic Thinking.
Yeah, I was watching. It's really well done.
Yeah, they did a great job. They really do good stuff there. So it's called How to On-F America. I don't want to get you censored. So
yeah, my listeners are really offended at language. So How to Un-F America. It's a really well done series. I enjoyed it. They made you look great.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so I hope people have a chance to watch it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll reach out again soon, man. It's great to reconnect. It's great to have you back. And I really appreciate all the work that you do. I'm subscribing to everything now, and I won't miss a thing. Thank you so much, sir.
Great. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, there he goes, everybody. How about it? Great to get Dean Baker back on. Go say hello to him on Twitter. I think... Well, it's been a long time since I've talked to him, so let him know that you heard him here at Dean Baker 13. At Dean Baker 13. That would mean a lot to me. And go subscribe to Beat the Press, where he is so good at criticizing the economic reporting from the Washington Post, the New York Times, everywhere else, NPR, CNN, and obviously right-wing stuff. At Beat_the_press. And you can find him everywhere else as well. CEPR.net. Get his books. Thanks again to Bill Boyle for talking to me. Great job, Odessa. Great job, Pete Coe. John Carroll taking us out. And I will talk to you tomorrow. Speaking of Carroll, we've got Dr. Aaron Carroll scheduled to join the show tomorrow. Very much looking forward to catching up with him and you. Email me at standupwithpete@gmail.com. Be the change you want to see. Meditate, read, write, exercise every day. and you'll be better off. At least that's how it's working for me. Talk to you tomorrow, guys. Love you. Bye.
You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.